All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. My name is Fred Diamond with the Institute for Effective Professional Selling, and this is a very special show because I get to do the Gina Stracuzzi, and many of our listeners know that Gina is the host of the Women in Sales Leadership episodes of the Sales Game Changers podcast. She, of course, is the president of the Center for Elevating Women in Sales Leadership. And Gina, we've already let people know that you're also the publisher of a brand new book. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm the author versus the publisher, but that's okay too. You're the publisher.
That's true.
The book is Success Was Never the Hard Part: Setbacks, Comebacks, and the Rise of Women in Sales Leadership. And it is 60 plus stories of women who have really, not just walked the walk, but changed directions, overcome obstacles, and have really risen to the top of their game. And the lessons that we take away from that, plus hundreds of insights from other women sales leaders. And I'm exceptionally proud of the book. Really, it's my baby, but it's the women in it are the lifeblood of it. I mean, it's really the stories they've shared and their bravery. So I'm super excited to share it with the world.
Very good. It's a great book, and a lot of the content came from the Women in Sales Leadership
Yes.
podcast within the Sales Game Changers. But today we're doing a very exciting show. We've done this a couple of times where we found a sales leader who is also the parent of someone who is engaging in sales. Maybe they're in their first or second job. And we're going to be bringing on in a second here Mark Conley and his daughter Lisa Kidder, who are both in B2B or B2G sales. And we're going to be talking. And you and I have done this show a couple of times. I want to remind people that they can go to salesgamechangerspodcast.com, salesgamechangerspodcast.com, to find all the previous episodes, well over, Gina, 850 episodes that we've done. They can also go to YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Give us a thumbs up, I should say. We would greatly appreciate that. Leave a comment. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. So, Gina, we're doing a lot of shows and we do a lot of work at the Institute for Effective Professional Selling with channel leaders, strategic partnership leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have our new partner growth program where we take partner managers through a 6-session cohort over 3 months. We announced that at our award event on April 29th, and it's going to be starting in July this summer. Again, we're doing today's recording in April of 2026, but that program is going to start in July of 2026. And we've met so many great leaders in the channel side. So we've been very fortunate to meet them. So we reached out to Mark Conley with Cohesity, got to know him a little bit. Mark and I had some conversations about how he's leading channel organizations, obviously at Cohesity, but also he's been at Sun, he's been at NetApp. And we were talking about what we do with the IEPS. And he says, well, you really need to talk to my daughter, Lisa Kidder. And we reached out to her, and she had done some really incredible things. And she's doing some great things at NetApp, helping on the AWS side. And I said, well, why don't we do another parent and child show? And we're very excited. So let's get started. So Mark, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for introducing us to Lisa and for what you're going to be contributing here. You've led channel teams at some of the top brands in technology in your career. Sun, again, I mentioned, of course, NetApp. You're presently leading the channel business at Cohesity. So how's the ride been? Looking back, what were some of the key drivers of your success? And feel free to chime in with anything else that you want to mention from your background that I might not have covered. And then we'll go back and forth asking questions to you and then, of course, to Lisa.
Sure. Thanks for the time, Fred. This has been, I've been looking forward to this session for a long time. When we first came up with the idea of bringing Lisa and I together, it just seemed like a great proud dad moment for me. So I was really excited about it. I've been involved in channels it feels like my whole career. I started working for a reseller when personal computers were brand new, and worked with channels as a sales manager, worked managing channels for a long time. And it's interesting. I was with a group of partners yesterday, and everyone was introducing themselves, and they were saying, well, I've been in this business, for 20 years and 25 years. And some were joking and say, I got into it when I was 6 years old. And it came around to me, and I was kind of last in line. I said, folks, I used to think of myself as the young person in the room always. And after today's session, I can't look in the mirror and say that to myself anymore, because I've been doing this for 45 years. A
Whoa.
lot of the
Wow.
channels. I know, pretty amazing, huh?
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed every bit of it. It's been a lot of fun, and I think that the key drivers for me that have made me successful, helped me to do good work with the companies I worked for, is that I feel like I'm a firefighter. I always thought that I could be a good fire jumper, the kind of person that gets into a forest fire and tries to assess the situation and make some progress right away. Not that I have anywhere near that kind of courage, but I'm pretty good at being dropped into a situation, assessing the situation, and figuring out what the next best path forward is. I do a lot of research. I make sure my decisions are well reasoned, but I like to take action. And I feel like there's a law of diminishing returns when it comes to assessment. So I make those quick assessments and get into things really quickly.
It's awesome. I love hearing people who've been doing something for a very long time and are still super fired up about it. So, Lisa, let's move over to you. It looks like you're following your father's footsteps, and now you're in tech sales yourself. So, what was it like growing up in your household? Did you understand what your dad did? Did you understand what sales was? And was that something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, my dad and I have always been very similar in many ways growing up, and I never thought I would go into sales, and maybe that's because I was, thinking I wanted to be different than him. I always thought being so similar to him was almost a bad thing, and but I never really understood, what he did. I never knew what sales was, and so I never thought, hey, I want to have a career just like my dad. I knew he worked hard, I knew he traveled a lot, but probably the most thing that I noticed was that he talked all the time to a bunch of different people. Um, and so his job came with a little bit of flexibility, but a lot of pressure. And there wasn't really a clear line between work and home. So I was always aware of what he did, but I never really knew what it meant. And it really
Mm,
didn't become clear until I started, being in college and trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to go? Ultimately, a lot of that led to technology. And I never really thought about sales until my dad really kind of connected the dots of, well, technology is people. Technology is just one part of the sales
hmm
business, because sales is all about people. So that's really when I started to consider sales as a real career. And honestly, not much has changed in our household growing up. I'm the only one that followed in my dad's footsteps. So instead of now just my dad talking all the time about his passion at work, it's turned into both of us going on and on, at the dinner table. And my mom has to remind us to take a breath and step back and include the rest of the family. So it's been nice having my dad, kind of as that role model. And it made sales a much easier decision than I ever thought it would be growing up.
Yeah, that's
That's
great.
that's great.
Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, as a lot of listeners know, I have a daughter who's in sales. She's at sales in Hershey's, and she covers some territory for Hershey's. And one of the fun parts of that is that she contacts me almost every day. Hey, Dad, this happened today, or how would you have handled this, or yada yada type of a thing. So that must be fun for you. What's your advice for Lisa? Let's get right to it here. What's your advice for her and others as they start their careers in sales?
After listening to her first answer, Fred, I think I should be taking advice from her, frankly. But I get a chance to talk to early career people pretty often. We have an early career program here at Cohesty, and we had one at NetApp when I worked there before Lisa worked there, and it gave me a lot of joy to deal with early career people and try to give them some advice and tell them about channels and about sales. And I always tell them that the most important thing you can know is yourself. And that's kind of cliche, but knowing what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not good at, helps you to put yourself in positions where you can be more successful. Now, when you're in your 20s and sometimes you're even in your 30s, you really don't know who you are. You think you do, but you really
Mm,
don't. And so it takes some time to learn that. But once you learn that, once you say to yourself, like I said earlier, if I'm a firefighter, I put myself in a position one time where I was a program manager, where I was back office, where I was, writing things, developing things, talking to myself most of the time and not other people. I found that I really just didn't like that kind of job. That's not me. And we had a situation recently where there was a female sales leader in our organization that was considering coming into my organization. And there was a choice between doing that and doing something else that was kind of back office related. And I said, look, you can make your own decision, but when I look at you, I think of you as a front office kind of person. You know, you're a person that attaches to people, that motivates people, that wants to be with people. And if you go in the back room and you're a program manager, you know, like I said, I tried that. I didn't like it. So know yourself, put yourself in a position to be successful, and be true to your personality.
That's great advice. Really great advice. So let's thinking about what your dad just said and figuring out what it is, that works for you. So you got your degree in computer science from Clemson. Did you take any sales courses at Clemson? I mean, were you thinking along those sales lines at that point, or what drew you to, taking computer classes?
Yeah, I mean, I really wasn't drawn to sales. Like I said, I never really thought about it as something that would be on my radar. So I didn't take any formal sales classes at Clemson, to no fault of Clemson, but I thought of myself as a computer science person. And my dad definitely helped me get into that field because he said, you can kind of do whatever you want with that, right? It gives you into that technology. And I even liked math so much growing up. So it was a good way to keep on to my very black and white math background while having, a lot of different opportunities for careers. So later in college, I did add a business minor, which I think gave me a lot more perspective kind of to broaden my potential career path. Definitely with the advice of my dad, he kept always saying that, I was very competitive and I was very confident, and I never believed him until I started to realize that business had a lot bigger impact, I guess, in technology than I ever thought. So no real formal sales classes, but a lot of the comp sci background helped me, get to where I am today with, a lot of the technical background helps me get that credibility with customers. One of the biggest things is a lot of the sales and technical combo is just a lot of tech at the end of the day, because the people is, for me, the easy part and the fun part. So the degree helped me understand that technical background that I needed. And then the people is the fun part that I get to work with every day.
It's really cool. We also do, as you know, the office hours sales professors unplugged version of the Sales Game Changers podcast, where we talk to directors of the professional selling program. And we recently did a show with a guy named Matt Radomski, who went to Clemson. So we got to know the leader of the Clemson selling curriculum. So it's definitely a great school to prepare people for sales. Mark, Gina and I both have children who recently graduated from college. Did you support your daughter's choice of major, knowing what you might have wanted for her as she came out of school, for her? And I'm just kind of curious, were there activities that you encouraged her to do while she was growing up that prepared her for this career?
Well, I definitely was very proud and happy when she decided that she wanted to do that. It seemed like a natural for her because I always said that she's a five-tool kid. She's smart. She's understands technology. She's gregarious with people. And so she's the one I don't have to worry about. Everybody's got, if they got more than one child, there's always one that, you just don't have to worry about, and that's Lisa. But I really encouraged her. I remember it probably differently. I've made this story up in my head, but when she was in high school, like she said, she was kind of a math and science person. She really understood that stuff. And she said, Dad, what should I go into? And I said, become an engineer. I said, because number one, you're smart enough to do that. Number two, you're not a typical engineer. You've got a bigger personality than most engineers do. And I said, if you're a female engineer in computer science in one way or another, you are a blue diamond. You are a rare commodity. As Lisa has put it to me several times, the people that are her peer group are typically balding, middle-aged, white, left-handed males. So, she's going to be a standout just from that point of view. And in fact, when we were interviewing at colleges, she went to my alma mater, which is Illinois, and she interviewed with the dean of the electrical engineering and computer science department. And he said, you would be a standout in my department. And I'm, the proud father and all that. And I said, why is that? And he says, well, because we just don't have any, white females in my group. So, not that that's the advantage you're looking for, but I've always encouraged her to do what she wants to do. And growing up, I can't say that I put her in situations or try to guide her into situations that would have helped her get into this line of work of hers. She just naturally chose it herself. She understands herself better than most people do at her age. And so she's got her own career.
That's awesome. I mean, really awesome. And you're absolutely right. I mean, just even being able to be the subject matter expert and the salesperson is you know, it's an amazing thing. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that. You went into engineering sales right after school, and you're moving up pretty quickly from what I understand. So what's motivating you and to be that kind of successful, and where are you going with it?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, I didn't think I saw the competitive nature of myself until I got into sales. And, it might
That'll
be the
do it. Yeah.
hardest thing, might be the hardest thing to admit, but actually in that training program that my dad had mentioned that NetApp has is called the F3 Academy. And they had us rank, what matters most to us, what's most impactful in terms of feedback from a peer or a manager. And what I had at the top of my list was actually recognition. So it's embarrassing to admit, but I think it's very relatable in sales because it's very visible. And so my dad mentioned one time, when you do well, people notice. When you don't do well, more people notice. So it was a lot of internal drive for myself of how can I be the best I could possibly be, and kind of get the most attention for all the right things. And sales really gave that to me, and engineering not necessarily did it lack it, but it didn't have that personal connection or that personal motivation where when the people I care about praise me, it's because of the preparation results. It's truly because of what I have worked for. And I think that's what's kind of motivated me to stay successful in sales is, building that trust with people. When a customer trusts me or when a leader pulls me into a bigger conversation, it tells me that, I'm actually adding real value. So it's really just that striving for the next big thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, of today's podcast. Again, we're talking with Mark Conley at Cohesity and Lisa Kidder at NetApp. You talked about how it's a people business, right? And especially in the channel, to be successful as a partner manager or channel manager or strategic alliance manager, a lot of times you're bringing together the partner and the vendor, maybe other partners, maybe other vendors to provide, especially now, bigger solutions. What's your advice for building relationships? Uh, you and I are probably about the same age, I guess, and we've spent plenty of time at events and industry events, and we would go all the time, frequently on a plane. Well, that's not as natural to a lot of people anymore, and a lot of things, of course, are over Zoom and web interview, web broadcast, etc. So going to those types of events aren't as intuitive, maybe as it was back in the day, so to speak. Just give us your advice for junior sales professionals on how they need to build these relationships.
You bet. A couple things. You gotta show up, right? And that's kind of cliche, but you got to show you care and you got to show up. I'll give you a couple of good examples. You build your network brick by brick in a foundation. The people that you build that foundation with 10 years ago, you may not use those bricks for 10 years into the future, but you got to build them and continue to build them your whole career. A couple of stories about that. There's an individual, one of our largest partners, that was new to the role, but he headed up the alliance relationship organization in that partner. So he was the key man, right? And he was kind of an enigma, hard to know. Not many people knew who he was. He was an intellectual, so he didn't really fit into the sales culture like the rest of it did. But I thought, I've got to get to know this guy. So I contacted him. I said, I'd like to, and he was in New Jersey. So I said, I want to come to New Jersey, have dinner with you, and get to know you. And that's it. No agenda. I mean, of course, there's always little things you want to talk about, but I want to get to know him. I did that 3 times before I felt like we had a relationship going on. And it was purely because he was the right guy for us to know. Turns out that about 6 months ago, he was given a new responsibility, including the things he had been doing. But now he's responsible for their most strategic accounts group, the largest accounts, the global financial services accounts, the global manufacturing accounts. And so he has become even more important to us. And it was because, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I decided that he was a guy that I needed to know, that it's going to pay off for as long as I decide to have that relationship with him. Another kind of similar story is years ago, there was another individual who was someone that I was told didn't really like us that much. He didn't really like our line that much. He was kind of ambivalent towards us. And I got a chance to have to spend a few days together with him at an offsite. And I said, I'm going to make this guy my best friend. I'm going to spend every moment I possibly can with him. I'm going to have dinner with him. And so he and his wife and my wife and I had dinner with him 3 nights in a row. And so I had kind of a sneaky motive, and I don't feel good about saying that. But what I found is that he was one of the most funny people I've ever met. I mean, just absolutely hilarious. Your stomach hurts by the end of the night kind of thing. And he and I are friends now. I mean, like real friends. And every time I go to his hometown and he still works, and now he's got a much bigger responsibility, we have dinner or lunch together. We just have a great time. So build your network, go out of your way to see people. There's the old saw that says, fly 1,000 miles for a 5-minute meeting. That really does mean something to people.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, that's a good segue into what I wanted to talk to you about. So, how are you working on building out your network? And, have you taken some of your father's advice on that? Because we all know that, especially salespeople, you kind of live and die by your network and how far it extends, and that's internal and external. So, what are you doing to build that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my dad nailed it. It's really just, being dependable. It's reaching out when you don't need something. And, he always said that to me of, even around the holidays, he wouldn't just send a gift or send a note. We would brainstorm a lot of, how can I make this thoughtful and intentional for this person? So it wasn't even that he advised me necessarily. He just did it with his network, and he made those relationships a priority, both personally and professionally, obviously, as you just heard from his stories. So I think I've taken a lot of that and, just tried to live by it because, he always told me similar things of, the small actions is what actually builds the reputation. And I've been grateful enough to have seen that throughout my, I guess, 8 years at the same company. The people that I worked with 8 years ago are now circling back and working with me all over again. So having that reputation that, I've just kind of built over the years from making those relationships count. I mean, it seems simple, even though it's really hard because you got to reach out over and over and over again. But I mean, that's as simple as it can get.
Yeah, based on something that Mark said before, most people will stay in the same industry most of their careers. Maybe in tech, they'll jump from companies. Mark, you've worked for some great ones. And especially now that a lot of companies have shifted over the years, you may find someone you worked with 30 years ago who now is working for a company that you're targeting. As a matter of fact, Gina and I were just talking about this the other day. A guy I worked with in the mid 90s and have loosely kept in touch with is now a senior person at one of our big targets for the Institute for Effective Professional Selling. And he's made introductions to the leaders at his new company. And if I had pissed him off 30 years ago, he probably wouldn't have helped. But but he was great. By the way, Mark, how do you feel with all these great answers that Lisa's giving us?
It's a pretty proud papa moment, I'll tell you. I was looking forward to this, but it's even better than I thought it was. Because what's funny is I'm here and talking, and I'm hearing some of the things that I recognize and things we've talked about before, but I'm hearing all kinds of brand new stuff too. And I think she's attributing things to me that didn't actually happen, but I appreciate the fact that she's giving me credit for things like that.
Well, no, I mean, like you mentioned in the beginning, Fred, all the phone calls you get from your daughter. I mean, my dad's the first person I call when something exciting happens at work or whatever. There's a challenge or some advice I need. I mean, he is the first person I call. So a lot of these things you may not remember saying, but just happen, in flippant conversations.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter at Hershey, one of her favorite expressions is your network is your net worth. So she's very good at meeting people, and Gina knows who she is. So, Mark, just one or two more questions before we ask you for your final thought here, your final action step, I should say. When we first met, you told me about some of the interesting things that Lisa had done. Some of the places she's traveled to, to broaden her horizons. How did these things prepare her for success?
Yeah, she's living the life that I wish I lived when I was 30 years old. She's gone to some amazing places. She's been to more countries at her age than most people her age, and certainly, and actually more countries than I've been to at my age. So I'm really proud of that her wanderlust and her appetite for different cultures and things like that. I've always appreciated diversity. I've tend to gravitated towards people that really weren't like me. Engineers weren't really like me, but I found I could learn an awful lot from them. And people that were in different countries. I appreciated their points of view because it was always different than mine. I always felt like I could learn from other people. And I haven't really seen that in Lisa, but I've got to believe that she's learned from that diversity too, because she's seen different cultures. I mean, she can tell you, but they've been to Iceland and Spain and Machu Picchu and the Southeast Asia and Fiji and all kinds of different places. Just an amazing group of places. We're actually going with her and her husband Dylan to Portugal in June. We're looking forward to that. So I'm sure that the experiences she's had in those different cultures and those different rules and laws and economies and things like that has really helped to broaden her perspectives on business and understand how to deal with a much wider diversity group of people.
That's I'm just thinking how wonderful it is that you have this piece in common. And yeah, I'm sure you'll drive your respective spouses crazy talking about things while you're in
And
Portugal.
Gina, if I can put one more thing in there,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, when COVID hit in 2020, Lisa was a sales engineer working in Atlanta, and again, these are one of these stories that sticks in my head. So maybe it didn't happen like this, but what I remember, she called me. She said, "Dad, I'm not going to be able to see clients for a long time. I don't think. This is really a shutdown." And I said, "You're probably right. It's happening with me. It's going to be happening with you." I said, "Why don't you buy a motorcycle and drive across the country, or go live in Aruba for 6 months? Because at 23, 24 years old, in a situation like this, only you can do that." And so they kind of did. Her and Dylan, they lived in Denver for 6 weeks, and they lived in Austin for 7 weeks, and they lived in Miami Beach for 3 weeks, not consecutively, but they really explored the United States and other countries as well. And she came back and she said, "Dad, we're moving to Austin." I said, "Wow, that's great. You're a grown woman. You can do whatever you want." But it's that kind of appetite for adventure and diversity that really is a big part of who Lisa is.
That's great. Lisa, you and I would get along just fine. I did all that except for I did it without any money. I was, there just weren't that kinds of opportunities back when I was your age, but it was fun and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So let's just talk a little bit before we kind of get to the point where we ask you for some final thoughts. Where do you see, Lisa, where do you see the future of sales heading? And what are some of the things that you're striving to do with that particular view of the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what my future looks like, let alone, the future of sales. But I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going away or changing. I think that it's going to become more and more about the people. And, I always strive to be one of those people that people can depend on. When they need something, they know that they can call me. They know that I'll always say yes. And some people say that some of my biggest weakness is saying yes to everything and not knowing how to say no. But I use it as my biggest strength because I'm always, kind of itching for that next big thing, that next challenge, that next, country, that next crazy place to go to and crazy person to talk to. So I don't know exactly what, the future of sales or even necessarily my future looks like, but keeping it focused on the people and as strategic as possible is really my dream and my goal with my career.
Well, I think
That's wonderful.
you'll definitely have a bright career with all the things that you planned here and putting the advice that your dad, Mark Conley, had suggested. I want to thank you both for all the great ideas, the great conversation. Gina, like you and I said many times, we got to do more of these because
Yeah,
they're always a lot of fun. And
they are.
there's always it's great. Again, our audience at the IEPS, Institute for Effective Professional Selling and Center for Elevating Women in Sales Leadership, are leaders in professional selling looking to be more effective, typically B2B and B2G. And what you both have expressed, Mark and Lisa, are definitely things that people should consider to help them become more effective. We like to end each show with a specific action step. So, Lisa, why don't you go first? Give us something. You've given us a lot of great ideas along the way. Give us something specific that listeners should do right now after listening to the show or reading the transcript to take their sales career to the next level.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this before, what kind of advice, what kind of action I would suggest for people. And I think for anyone, but especially for anyone early in career, to intentionally put themselves up in uncomfortable situations. Because early in my career, I think that was my biggest growth point, is saying yes before I completely felt ready. And
Yes.
sales has a lot of confidence involved, and that can be really tough, especially early in career. My dad mentioned you don't really know who you are in your 20s and even your 30s, but you still have to have that confidence in sales, whether you have it or not. So, volunteer for the presentation you don't feel ready for, kind of raise your hand before you feel 100% prepared. And I think that's the best way to not only gain that confidence, but get the visibility to kind of just have your career take off.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, you and I talked about this many times. Is that the customer's not thinking that, right? The customer's not thinking about what's in your head. The customer's thinking about how are you going to help me achieve my goal? What value are you bringing? So, if you do the preparation and if you really devote yourself to your craft, work on perfecting your craft as a selling professional, then there's a lot of great opportunities. So I love the way you express that. Mark, why don't you bring us home? Give us a specific action step to take the sales career to the next level.
What Lisa said about courage is really important. The three characteristics of great salespeople to me are ego, empathy, and guts. You've got to have a healthy ego, not a overblown ego, but a resilient ego to be able to take no and keep on moving. You've got to have the ability to understand what your customer, what the person you're selling to wants, and from an empathetic standpoint, and try to position what you've got as what they need. But it's that guts that Lisa was talking about, is the courage to commit to something that you've never done before, and step off the edge of the cliff, knowing that either you'll figure out a way to fly or something else will happen. So that's not really the next step that I wanted to talk about, but I just think it's really important. The next step I want to talk about is, if you're listening to the Sales Game Changers podcast, if you're reading the transcript, send me a LinkedIn connection request. I'll challenge anybody that listens to this or reads this to send me a LinkedIn connection request, but don't try to sell me something right away. Just reference the fact, just reference the fact that you saw this or you heard this and you want to make a connection. And then, maybe a month later, do some research and figure out what might appeal to me, and then, make a sales pitch to me. And by the way, there is so much information about everyone available online that there should be no problem with you knowing who I am, what I like, how to appeal to me, that kind of stuff. But last story, I promise, but one more quick story. I got contacted by an early and career salesperson about a week and a half ago, and she was trying to get in to see an IT leader at one of her prospect accounts. And she said on his LinkedIn profile, it says he's a music snob. That's what she said. He said he's a self-proclaimed music snob. And she knew that I was a huge music fan. I collect vinyl. I listen to records all the time, all rock records. And she said, if you could help me get in to see him, that would be great. So I went on Facebook, and in 20 seconds, I found this guy. It says in his first post that his favorite new recording artist is Angine Dupoitrine, which is a very unusual group. So you can look it up, Angine Dupoitrine. And so I got back to her and I said, this is his favorite group. And she goes, how did you find that? I spent 20 seconds finding this. So I guess the moral to be heard on this is, trust in yourself, do some research, get to know somebody, be empathetic, and then try to appeal to them with what they care about.
Yeah, there's no excuse for not getting that type of information. All right, Gina, a final thought?
Well, I just want to say that, Lisa, you are spot on about raising your hand, making sure you try things that you don't think you're comfortable for, because what happens too often to women, the higher up in your careers you get, the more that's at stake and the less of you that you will see around you. And so that bravery and that courage starts to go away, right? You're a little less likely to take a chance. Do it anyway. Yeah. Do it anyway. That's what this book is all about, right? It's not, well, this camera's not doing it justice, but it's about what happens when you don't take those chances. All right?
I wrote that book title down. I'm looking forward to reading it, because that's the kind of stuff that is very inspiring. So it's 100% true.
Absolutely. Good. All right. I want to thank Mark Conley and Lisa Kidder for being on today's Sales Game Changers podcast. My name is Fred Diamond.